Glenn here again. Welcome back to the second video in the series of how I created the Arpy website project template for Delphi. If you've seen the first video, you'll know that this series is an over-the-shoulder look at me working through all the steps I needed to go through to create the template. Last time we converted the developer trial into the release version and then added in the standard rendering engine. We just finished preparing the project to see how to use server-side composition to create our web pages. At the end of this video, we will have a fully working Bootstrap themed website that we can start customizing. Remember again that this is being played at double speed, so try to keep up. In part 2, we will be showing how to create a top level or document template and how to break it down into reusable template elements. What is a template element? Well, each of your pages will probably need the navigation bar. We want to create this once and then have Arpy inserted into each of our new pages. Using templates makes it easier to develop and maintain your website. Once we have templates though, we often need to modify the content slightly for each page. We can do this using server-side or client-side methods. The rendering engine provides some client-side tools to make this quick and easy without needing to know any JavaScript. We'll briefly look at these client-side techniques. Okay, we need to do some more tidying up here. So we want the indexes both to go to the same location. And so what we're going to do is demonstrate what server-side rendering really is. So what we're going to do is create this small section and then extract it out into a separate file so that we can use it as a template. So we're making a template, and again Delphi's helping us here by adding stuff we don't need. So we're going to take the head section out and put it into a separate file. So we put that into the views folder, and again we're using that .htm convention. So we're going to call this header common, although it probably should be called head common. I'll come back to that a little later. Now what's important is that you see header and footer were already used in HTML5, so you can't reuse HTML5 tags because Arpy deliberately ignores those tags. If you make your template name the same as one of the HTML5 tags, Arpy will deliberately ignore it. It's looking on the lookout for those, and it only does the ones that don't match. So we've copied out the head section and put it into a thing called header common, although it should actually probably be head common. Now we just want to make a few adjustments here so that we can see what we've done. So when we render this page, you'll see it's dynamically rendered, but if you actually look at the source, you see that the head section is now back in the document. So that is the job of the template engine, is to find elements and join them together to compose the final page. Now we're moving on quickly to the JavaScript section. So we're going to make a new JavaScript file here, and this will be used for our client-side tools that will help us update the template once we've delivered it. What we don't want to do is fiddle around having the server swap parts of the template out. We'd rather have the template actually know what it needs to do. Now what I've got here is something I used in another project. It doesn't have to be this, but what I'm doing is I've made a function here related to the page name so that we can say inside our template, we can say, oh, actually the page name for this is going to be whatever it is, and we'll have the client side render it rather than having to do any code change in the server side. And you see that's pretty simple. Again, this BC tag thing was for another project I was working on, so it's not really appropriate here. Let's change it to page name, make more sense. I realise here I've actually made a little mistake as well, which we'll see in a minute, but the variable name in the JavaScript down the bottom is site control, but somehow or other I managed to type site code in here. So that gives me a little bit of a hiccup along the way, but importantly, it actually does demonstrate how we can use the debugger in the browser. So what I'm doing is I'm setting up a target in the HTML to be replaced. So I'm having a quick span called page name, and what we want to do is have the page, when it's rendered, insert my page into the page name there. So this is a little bit contrived, but we'll see why this is a good thing a little later on. Okay, so when we run that, that all should work, but it doesn't. So what we've got here is the Arpy engine, the rendering engine will actually give you a pointer saying, no, you've made a mistake in your HTML here. So I left out an end greater than sign there. So that should now work. This is the thing I said before, is I'd actually got the variable name wrong. So I've said site code, but it's actually site control. Site control is the actual proper tag that we use in Arpy. I couldn't work out when I was doing this what was going wrong here, so I've just looked at the sources, and I'm going to use the debugger in the browser, which many people don't know is actually there, but it's an extremely powerful debugger that helps us debug client-side JavaScript. In fact, it does client-side TypeScript as well, if we include that. So we're seeing here that site code is not defined, and I eventually realise that I've made a mistake and fixed up the variable name. So I can go back and fix up the script and make that site control instead, and then that should work how we want. So if we run that now, the debugger is still on in the browser, but now this is my page is now being rendered. So you can see how we can use that later on, where we have multiple templates and multiple pages, and instead of creating some kind of server code that it does it, we can simply easily do it with the client-side tools. It makes a lot more sense keeping everything in the same file. So now what we're doing is, in exactly the same way we did before we took out the HTML elements, we're actually going to take the script elements out and put that in a separate file as well. So if we now look at our code here, we can now insert a JavaScript tag, again Delphi being very helpful. So we now have a element called JS comment. That's where all our JavaScript will go. The other thing we notice is that Delphi by default even now is making it an HTML4 document. If we make it an HTML5 document, you'll notice it's ever so slightly different when we refresh. So we're actually using HTML5 now, which is the default. That all looks pretty nice, and you see it still works perfectly well. Okay, so the next thing we want to just check how our compatibility is going. So if we're using Internet Explorer, are we getting a good page? Yes, that all works fine too. Now, interestingly, Internet Explorer, even the older versions, is now using the Edge debugger. So even though you're using Internet Explorer, you're actually getting the benefit of the Edge debugger, which is pretty good. It has some different features than the Google one. So sometimes it's quite good to use both of them and just see, get some kind of feedback there. So it's telling me that the caching is not enabled, which is a project I'm working on a little later on. What we want to do now is go to Bootstrap and just have a look at a Bootstrap themed website. What we should be able to do is grab any one of these nice templates that we see, and we can just drop this whole thing into our project and start customizing it. You see this one's $49 US, which is pretty good if you've got a high quality thing. $49 is pretty cheap for a website development. So we're not quite in that league, so we're just going to start with the free Bootstrap ones. There's plenty of those. This site is Start Bootstrap, which if you have a look at this demo, looks familiar from video number 1. So what we've got is this whole website is a free Bootstrap theme site. It's actually a single page in this case. That we can just download the entire thing and dump it into our Arpy project, and from there we can start customizing it to make it easier to use for us and easier for us to develop our new page. So what I'm doing is I'm putting this whole content into a thing called resources, because we very likely want to have a few different website themes to start with. And so all we have to do is just dump the Bootstrap theme straight into our content folder. So that, remember, that's the stuff that's going to be statically rendered. So if we do that, we will get everything we need straight away. If we now run this and go to index.html, which is the static page, you see that page is fully working in Arpy. There's not a lot of work apparently to do. However, we need something a little bit more than this static page. We want to be able to take this static page and turn it into templates so that we can use it to develop our new page and to ensure that we can maintain our theme. So the content in here contains a whole lot of jQuery, all sorts of things. These are standard libraries that are deployed with any Bootstrap page. So there's quite a bit in here. You don't really have to worry too much about it. You just dump it in and it worked fine. The README is also very useful. It's got some ideas in there. What we can do is, once we've got a full JavaScript development suite going, so we've got NPM and we've got Gulp and a few of these other things and Webpack, we can get it to build automatically so we don't have to deploy the whole thing on for all our users. I'm just going to do it all by hand. So again, what we're doing is we're starting with that index.html page that came with the Bootstrap website. So what we want to do, again, just like we did with the demo a little earlier, we're going to find the most sensible sections from this, and in Bootstrap pages there generally is a good demarcation. In fact, usually it's commented pretty well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the head section out and put that into our separate file. And remember, this is where I realised I've called it header, but I actually should have called it head. So I'm going to fiddle around and rename this file. So again, I've taken the index.html file from the website and I'm going to start splitting it up into template elements. So the first one is head, and we're using the template tag at the top and bottom, just a reminder, because the Arpy developer tools will actually check for that tag and make sure that you haven't accidentally put it in the wrong order, so you haven't put your document page in where the template pages are supposed to go. So there is a two-folder architecture. In this video we won't actually get to that. We're dumping everything into a single folder. Having the template tags there is actually quite an important thing. Again, this nav here, nav is a HTML5 tag name. So I just realized, I thought, oh, hang on, I better just go check. So we can look into the render engine, just that known HTML elements, and yet nav is one of the known elements. So we can't use that name because Arpy will just deliberately ignore it. So, okay, so that one's fixed up, and so what we'll do is we'll just keep going along here. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to work out what section each thing belongs to, so again, we've got a header part here, which again, it's pretty simple. So I'm just going to keep working through each one of the single pages, making a template for each one. Sometimes I might need to refer back to the web page just so I can see, well, which part does this actually belong to. Sometimes a little bit hard to see. So this is our header section as opposed to head section. Again, Delphi giving us a lot of help there by putting in useless stuff we don't need. So this is where I'm a little bit confused. I'm going, well, where does this come from? And it turns out it's actually that grid there I just scrolled past. I thought, well, maybe it's easier to tackle the bottom. So if we've got a footer and the contact me in the about, that seems to be much better demarcated. So I'm going to go down near the bottom and start working my way up from the bottom. So again, there's our script. The scripts that we're going to install. I've just used the JS common that we already had because it's got our site code in it. And I'll just continue on. I'll actually speed up the process now, so there's not a lot of point in following along too closely. We actually don't need that home page anymore because it'll automatically render to the name. Now you can see this is still working even though we took the head section out and replaced it, and so we'll just keep working through. We'll keep chopping sections out and splitting it up into our separate template files until we eventually end up with the index, or the home page, sorry. I think I've actually called it home, or maybe I haven't got to that part yet. We'll just end up with just tags in it and no actual content. You can leave as much content in as is sensible, so if it's not a reusable section of the content, there's no point in taking it out. Although you can often find that, well, you didn't think it was reusable in the first place, but it turns out to be later. So it's a per page call, I suppose. Whatever's sensible at the time is probably a good call, but you can always refactor later, so you shouldn't get too hung up on it. So again, just working through, there's still big sections, so that whole portfolio modal thing, I couldn't quite work out what it was doing, and the reason is because I hadn't actually clicked on all the functions of the page, so it was a function I hadn't actually seen yet, and I couldn't quite work out what to do with it, and maybe I've made a bad call here, putting them all together in a single template. Possibly we want multiple pages for that in the future, but for now it's fine, we can always refactor later. And we're very close to the end now. We've got just that last one to go, so I'm just going to call that portfolio, put that in, and so now we've got our page pretty much all split up into reusable parts. So I'll just do a little bit of tidying up. I want to get rid of the index.html that I originally started with. I want to clean up the target folder because there might be quite a bit of stuff left over. In fact, I'll get rid of the whole folder. Some of that other earlier work I did might be left over. And remember, we always deliver using the build events in Delphi. We deliver the new content from the content folder in the web page anyway, so it's good to tidy it up. Alright, there's all our templates and our views, so we are pretty well ready to move on to the next section. Again, these things are for JavaScript deployment. We're not using them in this case. There'll be a whole video, no doubt, on that kind of thing a little later on. Okay, so there's our fully working website ready to go. Now we can start working on new things. In part 3, we'll start customizing our site. We'll add a new page and hook it up to the navigation bar. Because we're using templates, the look and feel of the new page will automatically be inherited from the original site. We'll also use the site control features from this video and see how we can use some of the more advanced features. There's lots more to come in this series on creating the Arpy website project template for Delphi. I hope you're learning something and that we'll see you again for the next episode.